Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Lisa Mladnick. I'm a Roman Catholic, a professional life coach, and a Clifton Strengths coach, certified by the International Coaching Federation and the Gallup Corporation. The Wonderfully Made show is all about the intersection of faith and talent. Our guest tonight is someone who can take the complex and make it simple, the brilliant Dr. Stacy Trasancos. But before I bring her on, I'd like to explain that in this program, we'll be using the language of the world-renowned talent and personality profile, the Clifton Strengths Assessment. So we'll be talking about talent themes, which are ways to identify the powerful God-given potential found in all of us, and the idea of strengths, which is when talents are mature. It's when your natural capabilities become so well developed, they become part of your personal style and help you perform with consistent excellence for God's glory and your greater joy. Because when we know our own design, we experience gratitude and greater confidence, love, and appreciation for the designer. Tonight, it's my joy to welcome a brilliant leader and a go-to expert on the intersection of science and faith. Stacy Trasancos has a doctorate in chemistry, a master's in dogmatic theology, 7 children, and 6 grandchildren. She worked as a chemist for DuPont before converting to Catholicism. She left her career to stay home with her kids, from there becoming a writer and educator. Now she is the executive director of Bishop Strickland's St. Philip Institute in Tyler, Texas, and teaches online courses for Seton Hall University's Catholic Studies program. She is a fellow of the Word on Fire Institute. She's a frequent guest on Catholic radio and has written numerous articles for academic publications. Dr. Trasancos has written 5 books on the intersection of theology and science. Her new book, co-authored with Father George Eliot, is Behold, It Is I, Scripture, Tradition, and Science on the Real Presence. Dr. Trasancos lives with her family in Hideaway, Texas. Welcome to the program, Dr. Trasancos.
Hello, it's so good to see you again and to be here. I really appreciate this work you're doing, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that you get it, because you've been intersecting faith and science, and this is a kind of science, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. I appreciate what the program is that they put together. Ever since you explained to me kind of how the algorithms crank out your personality, I've explained it to a lot of people and told them about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat thing. The research has been going on for 60 years plus and counting, and it has Christian roots. It's incredibly ethical, very well vetted and respected around the world. So before we get started, though, and all of that, I'd love for you to tell us about your new book. Would you just step us into what that's all about?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's written with a priest here in the Diocese of Tyler, who's a scholar on Scripture and tradition, the Church Fathers. And so Bishop Strickland has declared this year 2022 that we're about to begin as the year of the Eucharist. He's called for a Eucharistic Congress. So last year, anticipating 2022 coming up, Father George Eliot and I wrote a book, and Pan Publisher published it, and it's called Behold, It Is I, Scripture, Tradition, and Science on the Real Presence. And so he wrote about Scripture and tradition. I investigated the investigations of Eucharistic miracles, and I really think that part is unique. It's standing on the great weight of the church with Scripture and tradition, the true proofs of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. But then I come in at the end and analyze some of the investigations of the Eucharistic miracles, and honestly, to my surprise, found them wanting. So I say the science is inconclusive. If you really want to believe in the real presence, we actually don't need science. We need to believe the testimony of Jesus Christ when he said, "This is my body." So it kind of goes full circle through modern science all the way back to Christ. So I love that it ended up there. We didn't expect the book to go that way, but I had to tell the truth.
Yeah, and that's so lacking in our culture. I really appreciate that. I know God will bless that. I remember when I interviewed you for the Homeschooling Saints podcast, we were talking about the intersection of faith and science. And one of the things you said, and correct me if I'm, not framing it quite right, but that is just that it's not always science that tells us, that what we believe is right. It's our faith that shows us what is right. Is that in the ballpark?
Yeah, faith first, because I love. You will hardly find a person who loves chemistry more than I do. I love the logic in the periodic table, the logic of the way atoms bond. And I find it fascinating that every living thing and every non-living thing, everything on this planet is matter and energy following these precise laws of nature. I find that fascinating. But I'll be the first person to tell you that none of that even matters if you're not looking at it through the eyes of faith. If you're not saying this is God's creation, and whatever we learn about it is like seeing into the mind of God in a way. And we should never rely on science to bolster our faith. We should be looking at the world with faith, saying, thank you, God, for what you created, and then studying his handiwork. So it's definitely faith first. And I've been pressed on that by many a scholar, and I stand by it.
Yeah, and it feels right too, because if we are people of faith, of course we have reason. The church has a beautiful tradition of using reason. Some of the great philosophers like Aquinas and Augustine show that so powerfully. And yet, and of course the monastery system that became the university system and the scientific method, all of that coming from the church. We love science, but only because it reveals to us more and more this great mystery of God's creation.
Yeah, and we need our young people, or we need everybody, but I'm always thinking about the future. We need them to understand that, so that they'll be told that, so it'll be clear to them, you need to practice science with virtue. Not just do things because you can, but do things because it's the right thing to do, or because it's truly going to help humanity. There's just so much confusion on that front in the scientific world right now. We need more people of faith practicing science.
Yeah, we sure do. And I'm not to get on a big sidetrack, because I kind of want to get back to your talents, but there have been many notable cases of scientists, the more they delve into the order and the beauty of the universe, actually becoming deists.
Yeah. It's kind of a logical conclusion. I mean, you can't look at the world and study the intricacies of nature knowing you're just trying to manipulate it somehow, but you're totally humbled by the fact that there's a greater mind out there that created all of this. I mean, it's the only logical conclusion if you study science.
Yeah, just beautiful. All right, so let's look at your top 5. If anyone's seen any of our other shows, they know that we put the top 5 in order. These are your talent themes. And I'll just explain quickly for the audience, Stacy, I'm sorry, Dr. Trasancos, I'm getting very familiar, what they mean scientifically, or at least as far as this assessment goes. And then I would love for you to take some time and just start to tell us what they mean to you in your life. So just quickly, we see 3 green themes up here, and those are the strategic thinking themes. And you can see one of them actually is called strategic, but those are the fast mental calculation gifts, and they tend to be very creative, and they also tend to be learning oriented, curious, very often fact-based. And so the analytical one in particular is the person who loves to know the why. And you can see how Dr. Trasancos was drawn into chemistry and research, because knowing the facts and drawing conclusions, but getting all the facts and being curious and digging until there's understanding is very emblematic of analytical, and she's got that at number 1. Self-assurance is an influencing theme, that's why it's orange. And self-assurance is the person who tends to, and it can be different at different times in their lives, but tends to trust their own judgment and really need space to lead and to make their own calls on things. They really don't like to be under the thumb of someone else's authority too much. They're natural leaders. Strategic, again, is a strategic thinking theme, and it's somebody who can look at any problem, any question, and see multiple pathways, all sorts of possibilities for coming into that space and analyzing and finding the right solutions. Their minds move so fast that they kind of blow people away and can seem to be making snap judgments, but they're not. They're actually doing a lot of work very quickly and coming to conclusions about what the best choices or pathways are. Achiever is an executing theme. That's why it's purple. And achiever really turbocharges all the other talents. It's somebody with very high stamina, someone who's very committed to results, and someone who loves to get things done. You tend to be a very high energy personality. And learner is just what it sounds like. Learner loves the process of learning. And with learner and achiever side by side tends to be a goal-oriented learner. But that's another thing that we'll touch on tonight as we talk and unpack Dr. Trasancos' kind of personal experience of her own talents and using this assessment. And that is that they all influence each other. And each person's talents really do show up in many ways uniquely. So that's just the quick flyover.
Cool.
It is. So what was coming to mind for you, Dr. Trasancos, as I was describing just the kind of basics of those? What jumped out at you in your own personal experience?
Well, I mean, as you read that, it's very flattering. Like, it makes me sound like it makes me sound in my head like the kind of person I want to be. So there's probably a reason for that. It makes me sound like the kind of person I want to be, but I was very interested in this. I mean, I think I am those ways, but I haven't learned quite well how to turn them into strengths. I think I have those natural desires to find answers and know the why and plan and learn and have goals and get things done. And I am very confident in my decisions, and I don't like it when somebody's over me trying to tell me something, because I usually think in my mind I'm much further down that road than the person trying to get me to back up and do something. And I want to be trusted. I want to be listened to. And I think that's gotten a lot stronger as I've gotten older. But I'm very interested in learning how to use those superpowers for the good, because sometimes it creates in me a lot of tension. And one thing you don't see in my strengths are anything related to people skills. I have a very hard time with other people. I am a strong leader, but I would like to be a better leader. I sometimes don't possess the empathy I need to see the person in front of me and understand that person's also on a path. I'm on my path, but I'm not the only person there. So yeah, I want to master those strengths.
Yeah. And you touched on something that is so wise, and that is those desires in you are placed there for a purpose, and they are indications of talent. You know, when you think about the people we admire and where God is drawing our hearts, very often they are clues to talent. And Gallup acknowledges this. The things that really attract our hearts are absolutely clues. So if we go back to just looking at those top 5 on screen again, and we see that your analytical is number 1. Just say a little bit about what that looks like in your life, even if it's not 100% what you'd like it to be. What do you see in terms of your own tendencies?
I need to process things. I cannot make a decision in a meeting, and I've learned to tell people that. I used to make decisions in the meetings because I felt pressured to, and then I would have to deal with coming back the next day and saying, look, I slept on it and I changed my mind and I'm sorry, but I'm in a new place. So I've learned to not make decisions in meetings. I've learned to take it all in and process it. I've learned to give myself space to analyze things, and give other people space to analyze things too. And I have learned by working as a leader with teams of people who are very different from me. In ministry, I don't meet a lot of people with the same strengths I have. They're very different strengths. And I've learned to listen to them, because if I like information and I like to analyze and make good decisions, I have a lot to gain by listening better and shutting down my own rush to analyze and seeing my conversations as an extension of analyzing. Like, I don't have to solve it right then, but I want to figure things out. I want to know why things happen. And too much so, I want to know why things happen. Like in the life of faith, that whole let go and let God, I'm like, but why? Like, why should we do that? Like, I don't want to. And it's not even a stubbornness. It's like, doesn't God expect us to do something? And as I've gotten older, I've learned that you can still be analytical, but you can let time go by. You can reserve your judgment. So I think I've allowed myself to be analytical, but I've also told myself to slow down and just keep thinking it through, because I will come out with a better decision.
Yeah. And the thing is, your talents, just to look at them in a glance, I would immediately say high speed person. But you may have further down your talent themes. We just have your top 5 here, a deliberative talent theme, which would be that person who does love to analyze all the facts and data, but needs time to deliberate and is not going to feel good about being put on the spot. And
Yeah.
so, I'm amazed at how well, you do with interviews and things like that in that sense, because I am putting you on the spot. We're putting you on the spot, but your achiever, your learner, all of that is so fast moving that you're able to draw from that. I also want to just say that in terms of, like, if I were coaching you right now on your strengths, and the problem before us, or the desire was to explore how to have stronger relationships, we would look at each of your top 5 and the things that are easy for you, and start to combine them, partner them together in strategic ways to help you to build those bridges and to create that slower, more listening, more receptive game plan. And the learner jumps right out. That desire, that interest in other people, that learner and the analytical too, just to really start to soak other people up and their tendencies and be able to see the various pathways into meeting that person where they are, be an interesting thing to do. Step us into your self-assurance, because you said something to me that was really fascinating about that when we talked. It had to do with the virtues.
The virtues. Yeah, I'm still like, I forget that this is my second one sometimes. Like, when I'm thinking about it, I just breeze over that one. It's a little bit embarrassing because it sounds like I'm a know-it-all, and I am. I am overly confident sometimes in what I think. The virtues, when I converted, you don't hear about virtues really unless you're studying the Catholic intellectual tradition. It's just, those are not common words today. And I remember studying the Thomistic, the treatise on the virtues from St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia. And it blew me away, because they are like formulas on how to figure out what the right thing is to do. And I understood the greatest of they're in order. The greatest of the cardinal virtues is prudence, where it's right reasoning, where you're trying to figure out what the right thing is to do, and how you have to balance spending time thinking and discerning and judging and analyzing. You have to balance that with deciding and acting, because if you just analyze all the time, you don't act, you're not practicing prudence. And if you just judge and act without processing and analyzing, you're not practicing prudence. You're practicing vices of prudence, whether it's rashness or inaction. So I got my head around prudence first and foremost, but then, so you need prudence to know how to be just. You need prudence to be able to practice justice, and you need justice to be able to practice temperance and fortitude, which involves other people and yourself. But none of those make sense. You can't authentically practice prudence or any of the other cardinal virtues unless you have faith, hope, and love. Mm-hmm. And you need faith in something greater than yourself, God, to be able to hope for a future good, heaven, and to actually be able to understand what love is. When I was not religious and I just was everything's atoms and molecules, scientism, whatever it's called, I said, I don't know how to love. And I didn't know how to love. And I can see now that love is the greatest of these, right? Love is the greatest of these. And if you have love and you have hope and you have faith, then you can figure out what the right things are to do. And that helped me understand my self-assurance. That turned me from being a really nasty feminist woman, non-religious, who was too arrogant in my self-assuredness, to actually having a very deep-seated, in communion with Christ, assurance that even if I don't get it just right with prudence or justice, I always have faith, hope, and love. And if I don't get it right, I will come back and try again and get it right the next time. Like, I'll keep trying and I won't give up until I do get it right. And God knows I'm trying, like everything. So that changed my self-assuredness into something wiser and softer and probably more likable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. One of the things that I love about the language of Clifton Strengths, and owned by the Gallup Corporation, in case anybody listening doesn't know that, Don Clifton purchased the Gallup Corporation years ago, but they define mature talent as being other-oriented, well self-managed, generous, magnanimous. It shouts mercy. Like, we're not just egoists. We're not about being the most analytical or self-assured or strategic and so on. We're about, how does this give God's glory? How do knowing my talents show me God's design and how I'm purposed to give him glory? So in that context, it becomes, okay, so I am all these things, and these things grow in me with a little nurture very rapidly because they're made to do that. But it's like turning the volume up and down. I can blow people out of the room with my natural talents because it gives me an endorphin payback in the brain, whether I'm using it well or not. So I might be overusing it and feeling fantastic while everyone in the room is kind of backed up against the wall. So it ends up being the Gallup Corporation defines mature talent as being holistically successful, not just people doing well at their jobs, but people having good relationships. And they do touch in certain ways on spiritual life as well, but that the spirit is involved. Yeah. Okay. So when you look at your strategic, does anything specific come to mind for you? That quick, being able to see all sorts of pathways and coming to conclusions very rapidly, not that so rapidly that maybe sometimes people feel a little bulldozed if it's not being kind of, it has to land well with people. People who think that fast have to learn to say, well, here's how my mind works. And when you said that, it made me think this, which took me down this road. You sort of have to step them into your process.
Yeah, I've learned to do that. But definitely, so many people in my life would say I'm a steamroller. My husband and my kids would be the first in line, or my parents. Because that used to cause a lot of problems in my relationship, and that my husband and my kids would feel steamrolled because I would have it all figured out. Analytical and strategic, I have a hard time separating those, and it's probably a dangerous mix with self-assuredness in the middle there. But I'm kind of wincing looking back at who I've been. But I would just figure it all out, like, I'm Stacy, this is our family, but I'm going to figure everything out, and I'm going to tell everybody what we're going to do, and it's going to be great. And, there was not a lot of room for, no, we're not doing it this way. Your room is going to be decorated this way, and you're going to have this bedspread, and we're going to paint your walls this color, and we're going to buy you these clothes, and you're going to have a purse, and you're going to do these things. And, I've been parenting for 32 years. So I have definitely been told by all of my 5 daughters to back off. My sons were, it went a little better with them, but that strategic stuff, a lot of times I do have good ideas, but I also don't have complete ideas. So although those are my strengths, I think I'm still trying to figure out how to have those strengths and be true to myself there. You said something to me one time about, how superpowers can cause harm to people, and you learn not to use those strengths of yours. You learn to shut them down because you're afraid you're going to hurt somebody again. That makes me almost want to cry when I even say it, because in trying so hard to be a good mother and in trying so hard to be a good wife, I did get to a point where I just stuffed that part of me because I just kept hurting people, and I wasn't trying to hurt people. Like, it was my way of showing love. I've got all this figured out. Like, we're going to go to Six Flags today, and we're going to have this meal, and we're going to ride these rides, and it'll be so wonderful. And it wouldn't be wonderful. Now I get stressed out because things weren't working out. And, I'm really glad to see that for what it is now, because that hurt people. But then what hurt me and my relationships and other people even more is when I tried to suppress that and not be true to myself, because it built resentment. It made me a very confused person, afraid to make a call, and knowing I needed to make a call. It made me extremely anxious all the time, like not comfortable in my relationship, not two becoming one, but just really scared and really fearful. And gosh, it took nearly 18 years for all that to get worked out in my marriage. I wish I'd known all of this stuff way back when, because my husband, the therapist, used to say to me and my husband, if y'all could just get this figured out, you would be like on fire, because you're so in love with each other, but you can't get past these things. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't have the language to understand it. And we're on the other side of it now, which is why I can even talk about it. But yeah, that's why I think this is so powerful. I've done these with my daughters. I'm going to do it with my husband. He won't do it yet. But it was one of the most healing things with my daughters, just to sit down and say, this is how mommy is, but I know you're probably not like that. And we went through their strengths. And I'm like, I see you for who you are, and I appreciate your strengths. So that was me being strategic and analytical, but in a life-giving way.
There you go. There you go, right there. You came up with a really creative thing to do, which was to use this assessment to build bridges of understanding.
Yeah.
And they have been used that way around the world. It started sort of in the corporate world with teams, but marriages, families, all the time, ministries. Beautiful. That's so creative. And really, it's quite an achievement to start to it's like, I use this metaphor all the time, so I hesitate to use it because I use it so much, but these kinds of themes are like having racehorses in you.
Yeah.
And learning to be able to quiet them, or to let them wander in a meadow now and then, to allow yourself those variations in themes that are on well-worn tracks in you, understandably so, because all of our kind of go-to responses are, we may not understand them or be able to see what are the typical blind spots here, which are typical blind spots for everybody that has, a similar array of talent themes too. It's learning about those is just good stuff. Anything else that you want to say about achiever or learner?
I mean, that didn't surprise me at all. I mean, I spent time in college, but I didn't spend too much time in college. Like I didn't take 5 years to get through. I got through undergrad in 3.5 years. And when I went back to graduate school, I got through it in 4 years. So, but I remember all that process. Like it wasn't even an option not to max out my course load every time, and work. And I had kids. So I don't know why I felt like I had to do all that, but I truly enjoyed achieving and learning. And I think I enjoyed achieving more than learning, because it was enough for me just to memorize things and pass a test in PChem and get to the end of the semester with my grade. I wasn't so concerned about what I remembered from it. That came back later, like with chemistry later in life. One of my favorite things to do is to go back and read my old college textbooks, because I understand that I can read them slower now and actually understand what it is. So I do think achiever is in front of learner to my own detriment sometimes, because I'd rather achieve something than learn something. But I still do like to learn things. So it's really great in my 50s now, just giving myself permission to learn and see that as the achievement, to finish a book and just learn a new way of negotiating with people, or a new way of talking to my daughters about let's solve the problem together instead of me telling you what to do, which sometimes they still need to be told what to do. But I've learned, I am learning now. And some of this, I guess I learned before we even did this, but it's really helpful to see it. It's like somebody pulled the veil back on myself, to see that now, and to understand why I do the things I do, and more especially to understand that not everybody does those same things.
Yeah, and to think too of everything about ourselves as having been redeemed. And so we can call on that. We can call on the waters of our baptism. We can look for God's guidance in scripture. There's so many different ways that we can start to kind of lay them before the Lord. We can ask Our Lady to polish them up and present them to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, you gave these to me, fiat. I want to live them the way you want me to live them. So what will bring more of your glory into the world through my gifts? And what will humble me in these gifts? Where will I typically stumble? And what will I be? How will that bring me into the desert to meet you and to be in your presence and to rest in you in my littleness and my brokenness? So we've talked about so many important things here. You were saying that even before you really understood them, you knew some things about yourself. What's the difference between sensing things about yourself for you and being able to name the actual talents and see the feedback? Like, what did that give you to be able to put those in a more scientific context? Let's say it that way.
Yeah, having the words is helpful. I know with my kids, that tool where you help them name their emotions. They can name what they're feeling. That is so powerful because when you name an emotion, I feel betrayed when you don't sit down and have dinner with me and talk to me. Naming the emotions, it makes it legitimate. It makes it real. It's like saying, oh, there's a name for that. What I'm feeling isn't just weird. There's actually a word in the English language for that because everybody gets it. And so having these words in this tool is helpful to me in the same way to identify what those things are. And it helps me to have those words because I spent a lot of years in therapy, especially after I converted, because I had so much anxiety built up and just trying so hard. Like I will throw myself into the wall, trying like everything to do the right thing, but I kept messing up. I kept doing it wrong. And I kept breaking stuff and breaking relationships. And so when I would go to therapy, there would be, one therapist told me you need to name your anxiety and claim it. So I would be like in my worst moments when I'm about to lose control of myself because I'm so frustrated, I could say, I feel the anxiety, but it wasn't all that helpful because I could name that, but it was like it was some unwanted monster in my soul that I just needed to get rid of. And that didn't help either. So, the next thing was just get on medication, which I did do for a little while. By the time when I became Catholic and open to life, I had 4 babies in 5 years because that's how I do things. And, and thanks be to God, I was given those gifts of children, but the doctors are like, you have to stop. You're going to ruin yourself. And by the time I was pregnant with that 4th daughter, I actually got on medicine because my anxiety was just like Zoloft, because my anxiety was out of control. I couldn't leave the house without having a meltdown because I was afraid I was going to let something happen to one of my babies and or forget something. Like it was just too much to process, too quickly to process it. I guess there was no achieving, no learning. It was just living in a constant state of fear that I was going to forget something. And when I went to therapy about it, it's like, name your anxiety, take this medicine for it. But there was no therapeutic help in understanding that's just how you are. And you need to organize your days being true to how you are. Like I could have done a better job as a mother with 4 little kids if I'd known that.
Yeah, no, it's really true. One of the things that I often say to my clients who are achievers is that sometimes we just have to, talk to our talents like they're our beloved children. In other words, okay, achiever, you've done enough for today. Now it's time for me to be a little strategic and start my wind down routine. And that's an achievement of its own. And maybe that step down from the workday has to be a little ritual. And, and maybe there's some flexibility there, but in the end, it's something that signals my mind and my body that it's enough. And that even this, checking these things off my list, turning off devices at a certain time, spending a certain amount of relational time, so I make sure that I've done that and been present, and maybe that cup of chamomile tea and listening to something, a podcast about the Bible or whatever it is. We all have our different things that will feed us. As a learner, that might be very soothing for you, something like that. But to make the things that are out of balance, get them back into balance by making them accomplishments, by recognizing them as accomplishments.
Yeah, and we talked about that before, and I have been looking at ways to do that, just to feel, to name each one of them and recognize when, you know, I'm being analytical, I'm being strategic, and to try to find that reward and that happiness and knowing, you know, I'm doing this and it's okay, and this is me right now. And yeah, just try to, I guess, orchestrate them to paint a better day for myself.
Yeah. And you can also, another thing that we often do with the top 5 is to take one in the morning and just say, Lord, how can I bless someone else with this today? Just show me. I'm just going to be aware of this talent today, and let God show you in surprising ways how it ends up being a blessing for someone else. And of course, with that attitude, you're going to get blessed yourself. I think we've talked about a lot about the struggles, and I think that's really important. That's something we don't often get to this degree. So thank you for your transparency and the vulnerability of talking about this. That's so valuable for us to hear that, especially from someone like you, Dr. Trasancos, who is out there speaking and writing and leading. And it would be very easy for you to just be a perfect avatar to us. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for showing us that, because we all have exactly those kinds of struggles with our talents. But what are some specific ways that you've noticed that your particular talents have helped you succeed at the things that God is calling you to? Because you are clearly on mission and are a very dedicated person. So where do you see those successes?
Well, you know, I like to write books. Like if I have something to say, like I'm a very good judge of how to write a book that will be meaningful. I'm a good judge of, no, this doesn't need to be said. It's not going to add anything to the conversation. It's not worth writing that book because nobody's going to read it. Versus, how do I say, you know, I have something to say on this subject and I think it needs to be said. I'm very good and balanced about analyzing the situation and giving the facts, but not in an overly sensational way. I'm not afraid to be emotional about things. And so like, I wouldn't, the kind of writer I am, I can write in a smart way to smart people, but not using jargon, not using big fancy words that just try to make me look good, that actually in a way that communicate and that tie the story or the thing I'm trying to teach to real life. So I think I'm a very good teacher. I'm a very good writer. I'm a very good communicator on very technical things. And I didn't know that, but I mean, when I worked for DuPont as a senior research chemist, before I left my career to stay home with my children, when I started converting, I was on the track for technical marketing. Like I had just started traveling, you know, I was the token research chemist for Lycra spandex division that went to Land's End and went to, you know, Eddie Bauer and Dockers and Victoria's Secret. I went with the marketing team as the technical marketing person because I could explain why the chemistry of these fibers that we were making would make their clothing better. So I could translate that into a market that mattered, you know, that they needed to hear from someone like me. So I was getting into that. Then I went, you know, stayed home, took a total change. I'm not afraid to jump out of the box on things. I'm not afraid, you know, they say thinking out of the box. I'm not afraid just to wipe away everything I know and start over because I want to know the truth. And if the thing I've built up in my mind and tried to understand isn't working, I'm okay with just wiping that away and going back to the drawing board and starting over. I wasn't one bit afraid to leave my career, like I worked all my life to get a Ph.D. in chemistry, and I landed the best job a chemist can ask for at DuPont, with all kinds of security. I had my own laboratory. I had my own team. I was everything a chemist would want to be, working on one of the most globally significant products. I could go into a shopping mall and tell you something chemically at just about any piece of clothing in the department store, because I had something to do with that. When I made the decision, my husband, when I was pregnant with our first child, he just said, do what you want to do what Stacy wants to do. Don't think about what other people want you to do. And I said, I want to be with this child. Like, I already had 2 children. God gave me another chance. I want to do it right this time. I want to be here with this child. I could work and be here, but I choose to be here. And I just quit my job after maternity leave. I just said, I have to move on now. And there was no turning back. I was very self-assured about it. I had thought it through. People were like, you're throwing away everything you worked for. I'm like, well, I don't see it that way. And I just did it. And so people say that was bold, and I guess it was, but for me at the time, it was almost like, heck yeah, let's go. Let's have these babies, and let's do this Catholic thing. But then a lot of great things happened afterwards. I use my chemistry now more than ever. I'm not in the research lab, but that's what's made it good for me. I'm not afraid because I'm self-assured. I trust myself to analyze and strategize and learn. And those things excite me. If there's something I need to say, like there's a few books I need to write, and until I figure out how I'm going to do those, I am not going to rest. I have to do it.
Yeah, this is so exciting listening to you, because I can see how, having analyzed and come to conclusions, you were able to self-assuredly make a decision, that you were able to see this is the next step for me, and have a lot of confidence and go. Yeah.
Yep. And working with God's will kind of changes that whole thing. So it's not just like, I'm trying to make a lot of hard decisions right now, even at 52. I mean, I'm torn between several wonderful organizations like the St. Philip Institute and Children of God for Life, which my husband is running and needs help. I have too many things going on right now. I know that. I just cannot get a clear message about where I need to devote my time. I'm spread too thin, but I don't know what to give up. And I'm praying about it every day, and the answers just don't come. And I flip from one day to the next. And I'm in a very difficult situation right now, but I've learned that the only way you're going to make a good decision is to say, God, give me the grace to do your will. I totally wish and choose to conform my will to yours. Just get my own desires out of the way. And I'm all in on what it is you want me to do. My problem is I sometimes just can't tell. I'm like, God, would you please just call me up to a mountain and write it down on stone and hand it to me? And I'll be like, we're good. I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to do exactly what that says. I'm all in. I will do every last letter, but he's not doing that. And so, so a priest was telling me the other day, probably he has told you that clearly, and it's right in front of your face, and you're just not seeing it. So I don't even know what that means.
I also just want to, very in the most gentle possible way, challenge you and anybody listening to examine those deeper desires. Sometimes our desires have kind of barbed wire around them because we've made mistakes, join the human race, and we're a little scared of ourselves and scared of our desires or our impulses. But if we've, kind of been to confession and done the things that maybe our spiritual director or, whatever it is that we're doing to try to have a healthy spiritual life, there comes a point where it's really important to just meet God in those desires. Very often there are holy desires, and those can be discerned. I mean, a desire to hurt somebody or to show off, just to be better. We obviously struggle with desires that are not holy, but most of the time, or many times, we can tell the difference to a degree, and we can always talk those things over with people, journal them out. But God is such a good and generous and tender God that sometimes we're afraid of our desires unnecessarily. Sometimes they can be the quickest path to clarity. If, and that's what I do, day in and day out as a coach, is help people. We listen together to the voice of the Holy Spirit in their hearts. And so often they'll say something out loud for the first time and go, I can't believe I just said that, but that's absolutely true. And then suddenly a lot of the misconception and struggle just melts away, and they're able to feel peace. They're able to feel this sense of God's hand on them, guiding them. And the other thing too is just you're always in motion, so this is not a problem for you. But God more easily steers a moving boat. So if you have some cornerstones to guide by and you're in motion, generally God is going to be able to steer you in the course of your life and the movement of your life much more easily than if you're kind of sitting around going, waiting for that stone tablet to arrive.
Yeah.
And I've been called it for years. This will date me big time. The morning fax. I've been saying to the Lord for years, if I could just get a morning fax. And then I almost hear him chuckling saying, would you really do everything on the list if I sent it to you every day? Would you really? And then I go, oh, I don't know.
Why not?
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about the future, you just mentioned, and there was so much energy in your voice about these books that you've just got to write. When you think about nurturing and harnessing your talents in that realm of where God is calling you, what kinds of things come to mind?
Harnessing my talents. I feel very aware of time, like it's just a thing with chemistry. Every second that ticks by, there's a lot of calculations you could do with that. And, like I like to say, because I am always thinking about it, our atomic clocks come from the cesium-133 atom. And in the ground state of the electrons in that atom, the electrons in the ground state, so electrons sometimes jump from one energy level to another, but in the ground state, they just kind of vibrate because they're not ever perfectly still. And so they're vibrating, and those are called hyperfine oscillations. Those little jiggles give off radio waves that can be measured. And when we say that we have an atomic clock, that's the cesium-133 atoms, electrons in the ground state jiggling 9,192,631,770 times. That is a second. That's what a second is. A second. So when a second goes by, that kind of stuff just happened in the world. And, I'm very aware that in every second that goes by, so many things happen in the world that I'll never know about. Like I used to cry in New York when it would snow because we lived in the Adirondack Mountains. It was beautiful, but there's all these snowflakes and they're falling and they're melting and they'll never be seen. And they were beautiful and now they're gone. And I would just stand there and cry. Like I can't see all the snowflakes. And,
Wow.
I have this sense of time though. And so time passing, when my babies were newborns, one day goes by, I'm sobbing because that day died and I'll never get it back again.
Wow.
And so how that ties into my strengths and those books I have to write, I think the beauty of books is that you can comment on the time you live in. All we know about history is what people decided to write down. If people never wrote anything down, we wouldn't even know what it was like to live in the time before Christ or in the time of Christ. And so when people take the time to write down commentaries on the time they live in, and if it's written well and it's analyzed appropriately, you really do give a voice to the future, a snapshot from your own time. And so I think my strengths allow me to do that. And that's why I have to write those books, because I think it's worth capturing what it's like to live right now so that it can be passed on in a book. Because this book's a little nice package of words. The photos on Facebook may be gone when I'm dead, but the thought that goes into a book, it's a complete thought and it moves on. So I think that's a good thing to have in your strengths, the ability to analyze and strategize and be confident enough to write things down that you know.
Wow. You just blown my mind. That was just so exquisite and moving. The thought of that girl watching the snowflakes and and kind of grieving them because you appreciated how perfect and unique they were. And just like you could reel off that incredible number of times that, I can't even say it, that the particle vibrates, that appreciation for those details, the uniqueness is incredible. Take us out, Dr. Trasancos, with anything else that you'd like to share about God's design working in your life, or anything else that you think is important about this conversation.
I love that this whole tool, this analytical tool, I love that it exists for people because, I ended up doing it with our team here at the St. Philip Institute, and it healed a lot of the rifts in the relationship. I could just see the tension flowing away. We did it with Bishop Strickland. So each member of the St. Philip Institute, we're not done with it, but we got started by our employee reviews were reading their strengths with Bishop Strickland. So my employees had the Bishop of Tyler sitting there saying, wow, Deanna, I really get you now and I understand you. And wow, Luke, I really understand. And they just, regardless of how long I'm here, they had that moment. So I love the analyst in me loves that there's this tool that we can use with other people, because it just, relationships were hard for me to understand as Adam. If you think of the human person as atoms and molecules, you don't really understand that whole part about relationship, like the Trinitarian aspect of relationship, where two become one, like two souls bond. I think of two souls overlapping like an atomic bond, two atoms bonding together to become one molecule. But there's rigid laws of nature that atoms follow to do that. And that's how I approached human relationships. Like, we're either going to click or we're not. Literally, there's chemistry here or there's not. And it's not like that with the human person who's made in the image and likeness of God, with a rational soul, with intellect and free will, made to know and love. When you want to bond like that with another person, the closer you're going to bond, the harder it's going to be. Like marriage, parenting. The closer you bond, the harder it's going to be. It made me understand why you have to totally throw it all down and be completely vulnerable, because by opening up and by receiving is the only way you're going to form that bond. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this tool is very helpful, because it allows people to be safe in their vulnerability, to say, this is me. The test says so. This is me. And to be proud of the test also paints people in such a good light. Like it does see the strengths. It's wonderful sitting there with someone saying, I want to get to know you better. Thank you for taking this test. Let's talk about you. And they read their strengths. It's almost, I've seen people cry because I'm listening and saying, I get you. And it's beautiful. And so, yeah, Bishop Strickland did it too.
Yay, good for you. See how you're an influencer. You're number two, bright orange there. You're able to ignite that excitement in others. And that's one thing that we don't have time to really get into, but there's something called neuron mirroring. And just as a takeaway right at the end here under the wire, it just means that the things that you're really strong in, when other people are around you, they can be much stronger in them. You can ignite that strength in them, and vice versa. So when you're with someone who's highly relational, for example, your relational capacity actually increases. So that's a kind of a neat concept to sort of start to wind down on. But Dr. Trasancos, what an incredible, really extraordinary conversation. This was a lot of fun. Everybody find Dr. Stacy Trasancos. She's on Facebook, but you can also find her at stphilipinstitute.org. Those are in the show notes. And yeah, there it is, Tyler, Texas. She is the director, the executive director of the St. Philip Institute under the amazing Bishop Strickland, who is such a warrior for life and for the authenticity of our faith. Follow him on Twitter, by the way. Thanks for being with us, everybody. To learn more about growing your natural talents, please visit my website, wonderfullymade139.com. That's 139 for Psalm 139. Lord, I am wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. We'll see you next month. Reach out to me if you are interested in coaching or training to become a Catholic coach. I've got some great news for you if you're looking for a program, and I would love to talk with you anytime. Thanks again, Dr. Trasancos. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and thanks for being with us.